Dear friends, welcome to another episode of The Informant. In today's video, we'll dive into a massive $17.9 billion in military aid the United States has allocated to Israel since October 7, 2023. But where exactly has this colossal sum been invested by the Pentagon? We'll also explore Israel's vow of revenge against Iran and the potential fallout from escalating tensions in the Middle East and beyond. Adding to the intrigue, Israel has chosen not to share the specifics of its attack plans on Iran, not even with its closest ally, the United States. What could be the consequences of Israel going solo in a strike against Iran? But before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a series of brutal attacks on Israel, killing more than 200 people and kidnapping 250 civilians. This provoked a massive military response from Israel, backed by near unconditional support from the United States. However, U.S. military support for Israel is far from new. Since Israel's founding in 1948, the United States has been its most steadfast ally, providing military, diplomatic, and economic aid. In fact, according to reports, Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. military aid in history, with over $250 billion in inflation-adjusted dollars since 1959. This relationship was cemented further following the 1979 Camp David Accords, when the U.S. pledged billions in aid to both Israel and Egypt as part of the peace agreement. The recent surge in military support is merely an extension of a deeply entrenched relationship, but it raises new questions, especially about the U.S. role in regional conflicts and its broader containment strategy in the Middle East. At what point does this support shape conflicts, and how much of it is driven by U.S. strategic interests? Now let's break down the numbers behind this military aid. Since October, nearly $18 billion has been funneled to Israel, with at least $4.4 billion pulled directly from U.S. military stockpiles. This aid includes a vast array of munitions, such as precision-guided bombs and heavy ordnance like bunker busters, which Israel frequently uses to target underground facilities like bunkers, tunnels, and munitions depots. Conventional arms and aviation fuel were also part of this substantial package. This enormous military support enables Israel to sustain high-intensity military operations for extended periods, avoiding the supply shortages that might cripple other nations in protracted conflicts. What stands out is the sophistication of the weapon systems supplied. The replenishment of the Iron Dome, for example, is crucial for Israel's internal security, allowing it to intercept rockets fired by Hamas and Hezbollah. The cost of maintaining such a high-tech defense system highlights another point: the financial strain. The more Israel relies on advanced military equipment, largely provided by the U.S., the more inflated its defense spending becomes over time. While the Biden administration claims this support is about strategic security, critics question whether these billions are being spent wisely, especially considering the high human cost of the conflict. Beyond direct aid to Israel, the U.S. has spent around $4.86 billion on its own military operations in the region. This figure reflects the broader U.S. involvement in containing threats that extend beyond Israel's borders. For instance, one significant focus of these operations has been countering attacks from groups like the Houthis, who control northern Yemen and have launched attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea in solidarity with Hamas. This is a clear example of how the conflict stretches beyond Israel and its immediate adversaries, involving a web of actors supported by regional powers like Iran. The proxy war is evident, with the U.S. and Israel having to respond to low-cost munitions with expensive missile defense systems. This brings up a key question: how sustainable are these asymmetric operations? How can the use of advanced military hardware be justified against low-cost threats like drones that cost only a few $100s? This disparity exposes a weakness in U.S. military strategy, where the cost gap between offense and defense may become untenable over the long term. The continued presence of U.S. aircraft carriers and troops in the region further increases the risk of escalation, even as Washington tries to prevent the conflict from spreading beyond the Middle East. It forces us to ask what the true motivation is. Is it about protecting Israel or maintaining a permanent U.S. strategic footprint in the Middle East? American support for Israel has always been central to U.S. foreign policy, but the recent surge in military aid brings new political pressures. During the 2024 presidential campaign, President Biden positioned himself as Israel's staunchest defender, declaring that no administration has done more for Israel than his. However, this unprecedented support doesn't come without controversy. Military aid to Israel is becoming a focal point in the election debates. While Republicans tend to offer unconditional backing, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is increasingly critical of the aid, particularly given the devastating toll on civilians in the region. This divide mirrors a generational shift in the American electorate, with younger voters less inclined to support U.S. military interventions abroad. Ultimately, what we are witnessing is the culmination of decades of strategic policies and military alliances being tested in one of the Middle East's most critical moments. The U.S. record-breaking support for Israel isn't just about dollars. It reflects shifting geopolitical and moral priorities for the United States in the 21st century. The real question is how long this level of support can be sustained, both financially and politically. To truly understand the current situation in the Middle East, we need to take a step back in time. Israel and Iran weren't always sworn enemies. In the 1970s, the two countries maintained discreet relations, cooperating on economic and defense matters. However, everything changed after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, when Tehran's new regime declared Israel an enemy of Islam. Hostilities have only intensified since, particularly over Iran's nuclear ambitions. Since the early 20th century, Iran has been developing its nuclear capabilities, sparking concerns in Israel over the potential for a nuclear-armed Iran threatening its existence. Israel's policy has always been clear: prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power at any cost. This was evident in 1981 when Israel destroyed Iraq's Osirak reactor, and again in 2007 with its strike on a Syrian nuclear facility. With Iran now advancing its nuclear program, Israel may be considering a similar preemptive strike. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's warning reflects Israel's doctrine of deterrence, emphasizing the need to neutralize threats before they escalate. Gallant has made it clear that any retaliation will be lethal, precise, and unexpected. This element of surprise is a hallmark of Israeli military operations, which aim to keep adversaries uncertain of their next move. But Israel isn't only contending with Iran directly. Iran's proxy groups, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Hamas in Gaza, serve as Tehran's military arms in its shadow war with Israel. These groups allow Iran to strike at Israel indirectly, avoiding direct confrontation. Hezbollah, with its vast rocket arsenal, is particularly concerning for Israel, posing one of Tel Aviv's greatest fears in a potential regional conflict. In addition to Hezbollah, Hamas has played a critical role. The recent escalations in Gaza and now Lebanon cannot be viewed without acknowledging Iran's involvement, as it continues to arm and fund these groups. What happens when these simmering tensions finally erupt? Israel has been conducting a large-scale operation in Gaza for over a year, and is now expanding its military activities in southern Lebanon, aiming to neutralize Hezbollah. This is where U.S. involvement becomes crucial. Washington has helped Israel fend off Iranian missile attacks in April and October, but remains hesitant to endorse an offensive against Tehran's nuclear sites. This cautious approach could shape Israel's next steps in this high-stakes geopolitical chess match. As political and military tensions escalate, the humanitarian toll on civilians is becoming increasingly severe. In Gaza, for instance, Israeli military operations have been relentless, with Jabalia city at the center of recent strikes. This city, a stronghold for Hamas, is also where thousands of civilians are trapped, unable to escape the constant bombardment. With Hamas refusing to lay down arms and using civilians as human shields, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is nearing a catastrophic breaking point. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, the situation mirrors that of northern Israel, where more than 70,000 civilians were forced to flee due to Hezbollah's attacks. Many towns and villages in southern Lebanon are now emptying as civilians attempt to escape the intensifying clashes between Israel and Hezbollah. These mass displacements and the mounting civilian casualties are fueling resentment and instability throughout the region. Against this backdrop of rising tension, many are left wondering, what comes next? Is Israel on the verge of a direct war with Iran? And if there's an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, what are the potential repercussions? Most critically, what would be the fallout of a broader regional war in the Middle East? If a large-scale conflict erupts, its effects will be felt worldwide, starting with energy markets. Iran, one of the world's largest oil exporters, could disrupt the global oil supply by closing the crucial Strait of Hormuz, sending oil prices skyrocketing. Moreover, with Iran's strategic allies, Russia and China involved, any escalation could draw in major global powers. To fully grasp the gravity of this crisis, we need to examine the historical context and recent developments in the relationships between Israel, Iran, and the United States. After the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, in a surprise Israeli strike last month, tensions between Israel and its neighbors surged dramatically, spilling over to affect U.S. interests. The reason for this is straightforward. Israel conducted the strike without informing anyone, including Washington. Nasrallah's assassination, which decimated much of Hezbollah's leadership, came at a time when the U.S. was mediating ceasefire efforts between Israel and Lebanon. The U.S. was caught off guard. This was evident in a phone call between U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Austin, informed only after the fact, was reportedly shocked, needing to double-check the details to ensure he understood correctly. Iran retaliated swiftly, launching 181 missiles at Israel, inflicting light damage on an Israeli airbase and forcing civilians to seek shelter. This raises the critical question, how will Israel respond, and more importantly, will it coordinate its actions with the United States? So far, such coordination has not materialized, leading to strategic concerns in Washington. What exactly is driving U.S. frustration? The Biden administration is desperate to prevent Israel from acting unilaterally and igniting a larger conflict with Iran. Specifically, the U.S. is worried that Israel might target Iran's nuclear facilities or oil infrastructure. Should Israel strike Iran's nuclear sites, it could provoke a massive military response from Tehran. This wouldn't be a limited retaliation. It could drag in not just Israel but U.S. forces stationed in the region. At present, the U.S. has 2 aircraft carriers in the area, alongside a robust presence of destroyers, fighter jets, and support troops, all ready to intervene if necessary. On the economic front, the stakes are equally high. An attack on Iran's oil facilities would immediately send shockwaves through global energy markets. Oil prices have already begun to rise on rumors of a potential strike. Should those facilities be damaged, a sharp spike in prices is inevitable, directly affecting the global economy and, not to be overlooked, the upcoming U.S. presidential elections. Diplomatic relations behind the scenes are equally tense. While Lloyd Austin and Yoav Gallant typically maintain close communication, they've spoken over 80 times in recent months, it appears Israel is withholding critical information. Why? One possible explanation is that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government wants to preserve its freedom of action. By informing the U.S. of every move, Israel could find itself subject to Washington's influence, or worse, be blocked from taking necessary military actions. For Israel, maintaining strategic autonomy is essential, particularly as it faces mounting internal and external challenges. However, this strategy comes with consequences. Gallant's postponed visit to the U.S. to discuss attack plans didn't sit well in Washington. His trip was supposed to provide crucial details on potential targets, and its cancellation only deepened American frustrations. Without this information, the U.S. cannot adequately prepare its response, whether to support Israel or protect its own troops in the region. Israel's independent approach also raises questions about the U.S. role in the Middle East. Historically, the U.S. has been Israel's main security guarantor, providing military and diplomatic support in times of crisis. Yet, this alliance is under strain. The Biden administration, while committed to Israel's security, also has broader interests to safeguard. America's military presence in the region is closely tied to maintaining regional stability. Over the past year, the Pentagon has ramped up its forces as part of a deterrent strategy against Iran and to protect its allies. We've already seen the U.S. intercept Iranian missiles and drones targeting Israel and conduct airstrikes in Yemen against Iranian-backed Houthis. This military buildup signals that the U.S. is prepared to step in, but it does not want to be dragged into a direct war with Iran. So, what happens if Israel decides to strike Iran without U.S. coordination? The immediate risk is a military escalation. Iran might not only retaliate against Israel, but also target U.S. interests in the region. This could involve attacks on U.S. bases in the Gulf, or even efforts to block the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point for global oil trade. This brings us to the second major risk: the economic impact. Any disruption in Middle Eastern oil supplies could, and likely will, have global repercussions. Oil prices, already climbing amid rising tensions, would soar even higher in the event of an attack on Iranian oil facilities. With the global economy still recovering from recent crises, this is a genuine concern for leaders worldwide. Then, there are the political ramifications. Biden is in a precarious position. Openly supporting an Israeli strike could alienate American voters, who are primarily concerned with domestic issues like the economy. Conversely, a weak response to Iranian aggression might be viewed as a failure in foreign policy, particularly with the presidential election looming. With Iran at the center of this conflict, the coming weeks are critical in determining the future of the Middle East and the U.S.-Israel relationship. However, there is still hope for a diplomatic solution. Some analysts believe we might see renewed attempts at nuclear negotiations, despite the failure of past efforts fueling skepticism. The Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab nations, could also play a key role, as these countries might serve as mediators. The tensions between Israel and Iran, already at a boiling point, could shape the future of the Middle East for decades to come. Though there remains a glimmer of hope for diplomacy, the path to war looms large, and as we've seen, the economic and humanitarian consequences could be devastating. If you value independent journalism and want to support our work, consider buying us a coffee through the QR code on the screen. Your contribution is essential for us to continue bringing quality analysis and information. Stay tuned for more updates, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the latest analyses and insights on the world's most urgent geopolitical issues.